Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Daled. This week's learning is sponsored by Robert and Paula Cohen in loving memory of Chaim Avraham HaKohen ben Alter Gershon HaKohen, grandfather Zichrono Lebracha. We're going to get started. Before we start, I just want to give Divrei Chizuk for all those living in Israel and also for all of you living around the world during these difficult, tumultuous times. Also, I want to just mention that for the next little while, I will not be teaching on the live Zoom until there stop being sirens in the middle of the night and wake ups in the middle of the night. So apologies for those who are on the Zoom. I will update on the Zoom WhatsApp group. So if you're not on it, you can get to it from the subscribe page on our website. And there you will get updates about when we're back on Zoom. But the Shiurim will be recorded in advance and they'll be put up. And that way, in case there's a siren also in the middle of class, I won't be stuck and you won't be all waiting. It just seems to be a little bit simpler and easier to do in this way. Okay, for all those listening online, it will make no difference to you other than it will actually be up earlier in the morning than usual. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. So bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Bet. Okay, we are starting from, we had Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel about the nation being, the Jews being like fish in the sea. And we had a comparison, right? Just like they come, right? Just like they come out of the water, they immediately die. That's the Jews without mitzvot. They immediately, right? They die if they don't have mitzvot. The second was that the sun, right, that beats down on them and kills the fish, again, if they're out of the water. Likewise, people, the heat kills them. And then we said, could be we're talking about in this world, could be we're talking about in the next world. And we explained already in this world. And then we said the next world is because what is Gehenom La'atid Lavo, according to Rish Lakish, is basically God is just going to bring out the sun and it's going to burn those who deserve to go to hell. And it will, the tzaddikim, the righteous people, will actually be healed by it. So now we're going to explain that. Okay, last two words on Gimel Amud Bet. Risha'im nidonim ba, the wicked people will be judged by it. Tichtiv, ki hine hayom ba bo'er ketanul, vayu kol zedim v'chol osei risha'a kash, v'lihet otam hayom haba amar Hashem tzvaot, asher lo ya'azov lahem shoresh va'ana. Okay, so here we have this pasuk about the day will come and it will be burning like a furnace, and all the wicked people will be like straw, and it will be burned up in a minute, and will not be left with shoresh and anaf. So now they explain what is this shoresh v'anaf. Lo shoresh ba'olam hazeh v'lo anaf lo'olam haba. Okay, there will not even be not a shoresh in this world and not enough in the future, the world to come, right? No roots and no branches, nothing. Okay, nothing in this world and nothing in the next world. And that's basically talking about the heat that's going to attack the evil people. Tzadikim mitrapim ba, right? We have this interesting phenomenon about heat that it can be both positive and negative depending on who you are and how it will affect you. So, what's the tzadikim mitrapim ba? Dichtiv v'zarcha lachem yirei shmi shemesh tzedakah umarpeh b'knafeha. Okay, the sun will shine for you, those who fear me. Okay, the sun of righteousness, and it will have curing will be curative, right? It will cure you. Marpeh b'knafeh, with its wings, it will provide a cure. V'lo od ela shemitadnim ba. Also, it will, we're going to see fatten them up, which is a nice thing, right? It will make them look more beautiful or beautify them. Shene'emal v'yitzatem ufishtem ke'eglei marbek. The end of that pasuk is you're going to go out and be fattened up like the agalim, like the calves. Davar achel. Okay, that was all in the second interpretation of our similarity to fish. Now we get to the third interpretation. Just like with fish in the sea, the bigger one swallows up the smaller ones. Right now, here what's interesting about it is each one swallows up another, right? A big fish swallows up a smaller fish. Now, most animals swallow up other types of animals. Okay, they prey on other types of animals, not on their own. And this is something somewhat unique. At least some of the commentaries explain this. I don't know enough about the animal world, but it's somewhat unique to fish that they actually swallow up other fish, even of its own type. So af b'nei adam, likewise people, they want to swallow up each other, but we're not for ilmalei mo'ashel malchut, we're not for the fear of the kingdom, right? Meaning of the rules of the land. Okay, that's how humans are like fish, specifically in a bad way. Okay, that is one fish would swallows up the other. Humans would swallow up, bigger ones would swallow up smaller ones if it weren't for fear of the rules of the country. And this is what it says in the Mishnah. Rabbi Hanan Eskana Kohanim Omer, Havei mitpalel b'shloma shel malchut, shemalei mora'ah shel malchut, ish et re'ehu chayim bala'o. Hanin Eskana Kohanim said, you should pray for the shalom of your country. Right? This is all around the world. There's in shuls they pray for the king or for the president of the country, because if it weren't for fear of the king and law and order in the country, people would swallow up each other. Okay, and that's the third comparison of people to fish, humans to fish. Rabbi Chinina bar Papa Rami. Okay, now we get to a contradiction between two psukim. Shaddai lo mitza'anuhu sagikoch. God is not found to be all strong. Okay, which is a strange pasuk. Uchtiv. Okay, this is, by the way, from Eov. Okay, that we can't see God's strength. Uktiv, but in other psukim it says, Gadol Adonai v'Rav Koch. God is great and is all powerful. Uktiv Yimecha Hashem Nederi B'Koch. Right, God's right hand is so strong and powerful. So how could we say on the one hand you can't see God's strength, the other one seems pretty clear that God's strength is revealed? Lo kasha, kam b'shat hadin, kam b'shat milchama. Okay, so the in the time of judgment, you don't see that God is all powerful because God holds back. Okay, we're going to talk about this, how God doesn't punish the Jews like he should, really. God has rachamim on the Jewish people. When it comes to judgment, he doesn't just wipe out the people. But Kam b'shat milchama, he shows his true strength and stands up, right, with the Jews to fight their enemies. Okay, being in the time of war right now, it's a very apropos line, and it's very true in this war, right, where on the one hand, partly, it's hard sometimes to see the hand of God, and we've lost so many soldiers, and it's very complicated war. On the other hand, there are times where we say, wow, and you see the miracles of God and you see how much God is actually with us. So it's not always completely that it's clear and obvious, but God helps us to fight our enemies. The hand of God is more, the strength, the power of God is more clear. Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina Rami. So he brings another contradiction between psukim. K'tiv chema emli. I don't have any anger about God. Uchtiv nokem Hashem ubal chema. God is vengeful and full of anger. So again, lo kasha. How are we going to explain this? Kam b'Yisrael, kam b'umot ha'olam. Okay, so the way we're going to explain this is to say that God's anger reveals itself against the other nations. Again, we mean sinning nations. Okay, one who are full of idol worshippers and those people who are considered steeped in sin. And the other is to the Jewish people where God doesn't have anger against us. Rabbi Chinina bar Papa Amar, he explains this chema enli differently, and we're going to explain this pasuk now. We're going to read the next part of the pasuk. Chema enli shekvar nishpati. I don't have anger against the Jewish people because I already swore that I wasn't going to take out my anger on them. But mi yitneni shelo nishpati heye shamir b'shayit. But who would let me if I could, meaning if I wish I were back to the time where I hadn't taken this oath and I could have made it Shamir V'Shayit, I could have completely wiped them out because God at that moment actually was angry at the Jewish people and was saying, I don't really have anger, but I wish, right? I promised I wouldn't be angry and I wouldn't reveal my anger to them. But too bad because, I wish I were back to that time before I took the oath because, their deeds are so bad that I really should want to destroy them completely. The Hainu de Amar Rabbi Alexandri. Okay, now you have to realize that this Hainu seems to be referring back to something before, and some of the commentaries say this is going back all the way. This is what Rashi says about the God. If you saw before, 1 second, it comes back to right. The God when he had the other nations in that big long midrash that we had on Daf Bet and Gimel, the other nations came to God and said, "We want you to, we want to come into the world to come." And God said, "Well, you didn't keep the Torah." And then God gave them one last chance, and then said, "If you keep them as right, you do sukkah, and then you show me you could do a mitzvah, I'll let you in." But then they couldn't do that either. So now we're going to say, and this is what Rabbi Alexandri said. This fits with what he said. Because my dichtiv ayaba yamahu avakesh lashmid kol hagayim, and on that day I will request. Okay, we're going to talk about this word levakesh, to destroy all the goyim, all the other nations. Avakesh mimi, who's got what? He has to ask permission, right? Levakesh is usually to ask permission. Avakesh mimi, amar kadosh baruch hu, avakesh beginninei shalahem. I'm going to look in their books of remembrance, like what Sefer Zikaron, like what they did in their lives. Im yesh lahem zchut. In other words, like we always talk about on Rosh Hashanah, there's the books of life and the books of death, and all our actions are recorded. So I'm going to look at the books where everything's recorded. Im yesh lahem zchut, if they have merits afadem, okay, then I'll redeem them. Vim lav ashmidim. But if not, I will destroy them. And that's exactly what God did. And according to that midrash, God gave them the chance, but then they didn't fulfill it, right? They didn't have the zchuyot that they needed. V'hainu da'amar Rava, and this is what Rava said. My dachtiv ach lo v'i yishlach yad im befido lahem shua. Okay, this is again the difference in the way God treats the Jews and the way He treats the Gentiles. So im lo v'i, if not by destroying, God will stretch out His hand. Or I can read you the English exactly from the Koran. They translate this pasuk as, "Surely none shall put forth his hand to a ruinous heap, neither because of these things shall help come in one's calamity." Okay, it's a little hard to understand this exactly, but we're gonna explain it. Okay, but God will not destroy them completely. In bifido lahem shua. Now we have to understand this word bifido, and shua is from the word Yeshua, redeem. So now we're going to explain. Amar lam kadosh baruch hu Yisrael. Kshani danit Israel, when I rule the Jewish people, ein ani danotam kumot haolam. I don't judge them like I judge the other nations. Dichtiv, as it says. Ava, 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 simena. Okay, ava, ava means chet chatalik from avon. Okay, they sinned. Ava, simena. Now the word ava in the third mention means I will wipe them out completely. Ela, ani niframi. Okay, so now what they're saying is this pasuk is read as ava, ava, simena, gam zot lo haya. In other words, you might think I will do that, but no, I don't do this. Okay, now why? Ela ani neframehem kefid shel tarnagolim. And now we go back to that pasuk, achlo be'ish lachyat. Okay, so achlo be'ish lachyat, by the way, is a pasuk from Eov, and the ava ava is from Yechezkel. Okay, they're bringing that pasuk to explain. What does this mean? Like the feed is pecking of a rooster. The way a rooster pecks, like peck, 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 a little bit at a time, that's how God nifra mimanu. That's how He basically, right, lifra is to pay back a loan. That's how He makes us pay back our loans. What does that mean? It means God punishes us a bit at a time. Now, what is this? This is the way God treats the Jewish people. Our enemies, or the Gentiles who are not good people, they get punished all at once. Okay, and that means, right, their bad deeds pile up, pile up, pile up. When it comes to the end of their lives, right, they're left with just tons of bad deeds, and they don't make it into Olam Haba. What does God do for us? Punishes us a bit at a time to peck away, literally, at our sins and at our, right, what the punishment's coming to us. And then at the end, we're left with no sins, really. And that's how we get into Olam Haba. And that's God's way of treating us in a unique manner to get us into Olam Haba. Davar achir, afil, okay, a different way of understanding this feed lahem shua. How do we explain that? So, afilu ein Yisrael osim mitzvah lefanai ki im ma'at kefi shel tarnagolim. Even if we only do a mitzvah a little bit, like a little mitzvah, okay, like the pecking of a tarnagol, shemin aklim ba'ashpaz, they peck in the garbage. Ani mitzarfan lecheshbon gadol. In other words, I take all these little mitzvot that the Jews do, and they can add up to a huge, to one big thing. Shneamal im befido lahem shua. And again, and that is how they'll be redeemed, because in the end, they're going to have a lot of small brownie points that all add up to one big thing. Tavar achir, b'sachal shemishavin. Okay, shua here v'lashon l'shaveh, their tefillot. Because of their tefillot to God, lefanai ani moshia otam, then I save them. Another, this is like what Rabbi Abba says. Okay, this is all about this concept. Okay, and this is what we were talking about before, and we're going to continue to talk about this idea that why is God punishing us all the time? Because God wants to punish us so that we can get to Olam Haba. If we get rid of all our bad deeds in this world, then we can get into the next world. So they say, Anochi afadem v'hema dibru alai ksavim. I redeem them, and they just talk bad things about me and say, oh, God did terrible things to us because He punished us. Ani amarti efdeim b'mamon lamazeh. I said, I'll punish them with their money in this world, right? I'll take away their money. I'll do things like that. Worldly things. Kadeshi is ku lo olam haba. V'hema dibru alai ksavim. In other words, why did I do this all? So that they will get into the world to come. But they didn't understand that. They just saw I was punishing them and thought I was doing bad things to them. And another statement in this regard. My dichtivani sarti chizakti zrotam, and I torture them and strengthen their arms. Elu ve'ela yachshavu ra, but they thought I was doing bad. Same idea. Amar kadosh baruch hu, ani amarti esrim v'yisrim ba'olam hazeh. I said I'll have them suffer in this world. Kadesh yichazku zorotam la'olam haba, in order to strengthen their arm in the world to come. Ve'ela yachshvu ra, but they thought this was bad. Mishtabachlu Rabbi Abba. Okay, along the same lines, we're now going to hear a story where a pasuk comes up where these heretics are trying to throw this pasuk at the Jews and say, "Hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense." So the story starts out with Mishtabach lehu Rabbi Abba lemine v'Rav Safra da Adam Gadol. Okay, we have Rabbi Abba who's an Eretz Israel scholar, and we have Rav Safra who's a Babylonian. This is going to come up later in the story. Rabbi Abba that was praising to the heretics how brilliant Rav Safra was. Shav kule michzah de tleis. So they exempted him from paying the taxes for 13 years. This was the thing that rabbis didn't have to pay taxes. Yom echad ishgachuhu. Now one day the heretics bumped into Rav Safra. Amrulei. They said, so the heretics in the Gemara often throw psukim and they say, hey, your psukim say this. This means your Torah is not right or something's wrong. So they throw him this pasuk. Okay, pasuk from Amos. Okay, Rak etchem yadati mikom shpachot adama. I only knew you from all the other nations, meaning God saying, you're special among all the other nations. And therefore, I will give you all your punishments that you're deserving of. So, mandi le sisya, one who has anger, what? They're going to take out their anger on the ones who they have the most mercy on the ones they love the most? Doesn't make any sense. Why would God say, you're my special nation, and therefore I'm punishing you? Now, we already know the answer based on what we've been learning. But that's what the heretic asked from Safra. Safra doesn't answer anything. It's just silent and ignores their question. Now, either he didn't know the answer, or he didn't want to get into a whole argument with the heretics. We don't know. But they took it and they said, hey, Sudra B'Tzafre. They started choking him. They took a cloth and started choking him. You might remember this whole thing from Sanhedrin about the cloths, and that's how they would strangle people in the court, right, in the Mita Beitin. Become Tsarule, and they start torturing him, okay, choking him. Ata Rabbi Yavau, Rabbi Yavau comes and sees this. Amarlu, Amar B'Tzari Tule, why are you torturing him? Amrule, they said to him, Lav Amarlan, Adam Gadolu, didn't you tell us he was a really wise person? You didn't even know how to explain to us this pasuk. Amar lehu, Amar lehu b'tanai. I said he was a scholar. I said in Tanaitic material. Bikrimi, Amar lehu, I didn't tell you he knows psukim. Amrule, they said to him, Maishna atun diada atun. So they said, why do you, and you in plural, it must be meaning, you, the Israeli scholars, know psukim, and the Babylonians don't know psukim. They only know Tanaitic sources. Amar Luhu, right? It's like people who spend their time in Daf Yomi and don't learn Tanakh, right? They know all Gemara, they don't know Psukim. So Amar Luhu, Ana Deshchichan Gabechon, Raminu Nanafshinu Ma'ayinim. Inu lo ma'ayine. He says, listen, we live in Israel among heretics. We have to learn these Psukim because you're going to question us with them. And therefore we study them well so we know what to respond back to. They don't do that because they don't have heretics in their midst, and therefore they don't need to. It's an interesting answer, right? We don't only learn Torah and Psukim Tanakh in order to answer the heretics. But that's his answer to them. Whether it's true or not is a different story. Amrule, Malanat. So they say, okay, fine. Well, at least you explain this pasuk to us. Amar Lehu, Amsholach HaMashal. I'll give you a parable. Lema Davar Domet. To what is this similar? La'adam shenoshem mishnei b'nei adam. This person who's owed money by two people. Echad oavo, echad sono. One he loves and one he hates. The one he loves, he takes back a little bit at a time. It's not so painful to pay back a loan a little bit at a time. So the one he hates, he takes it all back at once. And that again explains the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles and how God handles us with our punishments. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Now we're moving off to a different topic, similar again, or in the idea of reward and punishment. But now about tzaddikim and rishayim. These are like big global questions, right? Why do Jews get punished? Why do bad things happen to good people? All kind of similar overlapping topics. So why does it say, okay, what does it mean when Avram said to God, the whole stone story, right? It's chalila, right? We're going to explain exactly what this word chalila means here, but that you're doing this thing to kill tzaddikim with rishayim, righteous people with evil people. Amar Abraham lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avram said to God, Ribono shel Olam, Chulin hu me'asot kadavar hazeh la'amid tzadikim rasha. It's going to be a chilul. That's what they mean by chulin. Chilul Hashem, like a desecration of God's name. People are going to say, look at this God. He kills tzadikim with Risha'im. Below, so now the Gemara says, what do you mean? Why not? V'aktiv, it says in the pasuk, God does this. V'yecharti mimcha tzadik v'rasha. I'm going to destroy among you tzadik and rasha. Okay, righteous and evil. So they say, no, that, but tzadik she'eno gamor. There's two types of tzadikim. Perfect tzaddik and a tzaddik that's not perfect. So the ones that are not perfect get destroyed. The ones that are perfect shouldn't get destroyed with the Risha'im. Avav tzaddik more low, but even a tzaddik more what doesn't get punished? V'aktiv. Umi mikdashi tachelu. Okay, this is a pasuk which describes in Yechezkel, zaken, bachur, b'tula, taf, and nashim, right? The young and old, the virgins, the children, the women are going to be killed. Mashchit, ba'al kol ish asher alav hatav, al tigashu, umi mikdashi tachelu. And from my temple you shall start. Now, Tani Rav Yosef had a bright Tana that said, Al tikrei mi mikdashi. Don't say from my sanctuary, my holy place. Ela mi mekudashai, from the sanctified people. Elu b'nei adam shekimu et Torah me'alef ad taf. I'm going to start destroying the really perfect people who do the Torah from Aleph to Taf. They do the complete Torah, everything. So how can you say tzaddikim gumulim aren't going to get destroyed also? Even those tzaddikim that did all the mitzvot, they are people who could have protested what the other people were doing, and they didn't. And on account of that, they're like tzaddikim that are not gemulim. In other words, you can't be a tzaddik, a complete tzaddik, unless you've also reprimanded people who would have taken your reprimanding. And if you didn't do that, then you're already in the category of a tzaddik she'eino gamor, and you're going to get destroyed. So the only ones who don't get destroyed are the tzaddikim gemulim, who also either have no potential chance to protest the people's actions, or they did and it didn't help. Okay, so that's how we explain the tzaddikim who get destroyed. With the wicked people, they're everybody else. Rav Papa Rami. So Rav Papa brings another contradiction. K'tiv el zo'em b'chol yom. God gets angry every day. We're going to get into this whole long thing about God's anger, where when God gets angry in a day, and we're going to see a lot of a repeat sugya that we learned in Sanhedrin. And it says, Lifnei zamo miyamod, who can stand up to God's anger? Now, if God gets angry every day and no one can stand up to God's anger, then there shouldn't be people in the world anymore. So, lo kasha kam b'yachid kam b'tzibur. God gets angry every day. That's at the individual. That's at the community. But because the community has strengths of zchuyot, merit, that stands up against the anger of God. But lifnei zamo miyamod, if God were to get angry, nobody could stand up to God. That would be an individual who sinned, would be able to stand up to the anger of God. But the anger of God is really on the community, not on the individuals. But if it were on the individual would have no potential. So Tanu Rabbanan, El Zo'em B'chol Yom. Now we're going to have a brighter. We saw this in the past, as I said, also, by the way, in Brachot, and it came up in Sanhedrin, and perhaps in other places as well. El Zo'em B'chol Yom. God gets angry every day. B'kama zamo, how long? Rega, a moment. B'kama rega, how much is a moment? Zohi rega. 1/53,848 of an hour. Okay, which I think, if I read correctly in the Shan scene, is 1/15 of a second. That's the amount of time God gets angry every day. Nobody knows how to basically figure out exactly when that moment is. Chutz mi Bil'am Rasha, other than Bil'am. He knew how to do that. How do we know that? Dichtiv, as it said by Bil'am, v'yodea dat elyon. He understood God. Okay, what this is going to mean, we're going to see in another minute, that he knew to know exactly when this hour was. Okay, we'll see how we know that further on in the daf. But now we're going to see, now, who says Yodea Dat Elyon? Bilam says about himself. So before we get to understanding this Yodea Dat Elyon means what we're talking about, when God gets angry, first we're going to have a little aside, which is, if he didn't even understand his own animal, how could he possibly understand God? How do we know he didn't understand this whole animal? My dat bem tolo aviyada. How do we know he didn't understand his animal? Well, we're now going to basically go into this pasuk. Okay, this is a very typical style of a midrash. where they take a pasuk with a lot of seemingly unnecessary words and say that obviously there was a bit of a conversation going on, a back and forth that you're missing in the pasuk. Like, for example, with Abraham, when God says to Abraham in the Akedah, go take kach na et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak. Why didn't you just say take Yitzchak? Why do you have to say take your son, the one you love, right? Your son, the only one, the one you love, at Yitzchak. Why did it go in that order? And then we say there was this conversation going, right? God said, take this one. He said, what? Not that one, right? It was a whole back and forth about who, till God got to Yitzchak. Okay, that there was a conversation going on that you don't see in the text. It's like reading between the lines. So here we're going to take this pasuk, where basically the aton, if you remember, the donkey starts talking to Bilam and says, Halo anochi atoncha, I am your aton, asher achavta alai, that you've been riding me, me'otcha ad hayom hazeh, from way back when until this day. Ha'esken hiskanti la'asot lecha kol. Okay, so we're gonna have to understand exactly how they understand this word, but ha'esken hiskanti, are you gonna put me in danger to do this? Vayomer lo, and then he says no. Okay, so the donkey stands up to Bilam, but he has this whole long worded sentence, and we're gonna have to understand the different parts of the sentence and the conversation that ensued according to the Midrash. So when the Sarei Moav, the officers of Moav, came to Bilam and they saw him riding on a donkey, and they said to him, "My rachavta asusya. Why aren't you riding on a horse? Horse is a much more respectable animal than a donkey." Amar lahu b'ritiva shadele. I sent him out to the meadows, or something like that. Miyad vatomer ha'aton. So the aton speaks up and says, "You liar! Halo anochi atoncha. I am your donkey. You don't have a horse." Amarla litina ba'almi. He says, "Oh yeah, well my donkey said it's my donkey, but yeah, he is my donkey. But I put all my loads on him. I don't usually ride him." To which the donkey answers, Amarle, you liar. I'm adding those words, but asher achavta alai, that you rode on me. So Amarle, again, filling in the blanks here before that we get to the next phrase, a cry ba'alma. Oh, that's just once in a blue moon. Amarle, so the Aton speaks up and says, Meotcha ad hayom hazeh, from a long time ago until this day, meaning you ride on me every day. Velod ella, and not only that, now we get to this hesken iskanti, what this means. Not only that, you ride on me during the day, and you have relations with me at night. How do we know that? That's by David Melech and Abishag, who warms him up when he's very old and he's not feeling well, and seems to be sexual relations or in a somewhat of a sexual manner. So Hasken Iskanti reminds of the Sochen, it's the same root, and that means he engaged in relations, and that's what the Aton is saying. So there, obviously, he didn't understand that his donkey had enough sense to speak because he tried making up these lies, and the donkey basically, revealed his lies to the officers of Moab. Now we get back to Yodeh Adad Elyon and how Bil'am had this extra special talent. He knew when to find. He was the only one who knew when this moment of anger of God was, and we're going to see that now. Elamai Yodeh Adad Elyon. So what does that mean? He knew God. He understood God. He knew to know the exact moment that God got angry. And this is what the Navi said. Okay, this is in Micha. Ami zechorna ma'ya'at Balak melech Moav. Okay, my nation, you should remember what Balak melech Moav wanted to do. Uma'ona'otam Bilam ben Be'or, and what Bilam answered him. Mina shitim ba'ada Gilgal, right from the shitim to the Gilgal. Leman dad tzidkot Hashem, in order to know the righteousness of God. Meaning through Bilam, what was revealed, how righteous God is. Now, how is that revealed? Well, Amar Rabbi Elazal, he explains this pasuk. Amar lam Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. God said to the Jewish people, Ami ru'u kama tzedakot asiti machem. Look how many righteous things I did to you. Shelo ka'asti alechem kol otam yamim. Even though I get angry every day for a moment, those days I didn't let my anger come out. Because she'im ka'asti alechem, had I done it, and Bilam knew exactly when that moment was, he would have cursed you exactly at that moment, and then lo nisher misonehem she'Yisrael tzaridu palit. There would have been nothing left of the enemies of the Jews, which really means the Jewish people. It's a way of what we call a euphemism. They want to say the Jews would have been wiped out, so he said the enemies of the Jews would have been wiped out, but what he really meant was the Jews would have been wiped out. And we're going to see that another reference to it in the pasuk when Bilam says to Balak, "Ma kov lo kabo el," and I can't curse God. Umak is am loza am Hashem. Okay, and I can't curse if God wouldn't curse, and I can be angry if loza am Hashem, if God didn't get angry. Okay, in other words, God didn't get angry. Bilam says, had God gotten angry, I would have been able to curse the Jewish people, but I couldn't because God didn't get angry in those days. The Kamazamo, and how long is his Zam? Now, we already had this, and here we're going to see it seems like just a different interpretation. Someone who didn't have the other one about 1 over 58,348 of a second, of an hour. But Kamazamo Rega, it's a moment. The Kamarega, how much is a moment? Amar Amemar Vitema Ravina, either Amemar or Ravina said, Rega Kamemri. It's the amount of time it says to take the word, it takes to say the word Rega. How do we know that God's anger is only for a moment? Very famous pasuk from Tehillim. It's a moment. God's anger is a moment. Some people say it's a different pasuk. Okay, it's almost just a moment until the anger subsides. Okay, so here you see the anger of God is just for a moment. What time of day does God get angry? Amar Abaye, Betlachai Kamaita. Ki chivra karbalta de tarnagolet. In the first 3 hours of the day, when the carbolet, I forgot what the word is in English, but the part at the very top of the rooster's, the crown of the rooster, is white. So the Gemara says, Kol shata v'shata mechaber chivra. The crown of the rooster is always white. So Kol shata it besurai kesumaiki. Each hour it has a little red strands in it. At that moment, it has no red strands in it at all. So now we're going to hear a story about this. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and then we're going to have 4 statements of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi after that. We're going to come back to him. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi have a mitzar le'ahimina. There was a amin who was bothering him b'krai with psukim. So there was a heretic who was throwing psukim at him all the time and bothering him. Yom Echad, not get right, just like we saw the heretic before with the psukim and saying, hey, your God said this, blah, 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 your God must be wrong. So Yom Echad, not get turnagola, but ukme ben kare darsi. So he took a rooster and he set it up by the legs of his bed. Va'ayim ba, and he stared at it. Savar, he thought, kimaiti hayishata, when exactly that moment comes and I see that the crown of the rooster is all white, I'll curse this heretic. Kimata ishata, exactly at the moment it happened, nimnain, he fell asleep and he missed it. Hamal, when he woke up and he realized and he missed it, he said, Shema mina lav orachar lamei bat hachi. It must be this isn't the right way to go about doing things, because v'rachamav al kol masav k'tiv, it says God has mercy on all of his creations, meaning even those evil people, and k'tiv gam anosh l'tzadik lo tov. It's not good for the righteous people to bring punishments on people. Tana Mishmei to Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to explain why in the first 3 hours of the day is that when God gets angry. By the way, this is interesting in terms of Avodah Zarah and comparing, idol worshippers to Jews and saying that, the idol worshippers are deserving of punishment, but it's not us who should be delivering the punishment, really, right? It's left for God. It's also an interesting statement. So Tana Mishmei to Rabbi Meir, there's a bright in the name of Rabbi Meir that says, when the kings put their crowns on their heads, if you remember from the beginning of Masechet Brachot, we say Kriyat Shema until the first 3 hours of the day. Why do we have until then? Because that's when the sons of the kings, and even perhaps that means even the kings wake up. They wake up late, up until the 3rd hour, and that's the time when they wake up and they put their crowns on their heads, and Mishtachavim l'Chaman, they bow down to the sun. Miyad ko'es Kadosh Baruch Hu, God gets angry early in the morning when he sees that people are worshiping the sun. That makes him angry that people don't see God in the world. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Now, apropos this idea about the first 3 hours, God being angry, and we're going to see that God judges people in those hours. Lo litzle inish slota de musfe, don't daven musaf, bitlache kamaite, to yoma, in the first 3 hours of the day, biyoma kama de reshata biyachid. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, as an individual. By the way, most people think it's not the first day, it's really both days of Rosh Hashanah, by yourself. And don't daven musaf in the first of Rosh Hashanah in the first 3 hours of the day. If you're not in the community, you're not in shul, you're doing it by yourself. Okay, why? Dilma kevan demafkidina, because that's when God is bringing judgment. Dilma ma'ayne ba'ovade. Maybe God will look at your actions. V'dachafule mitche, and you'll be pushed off. In other words, God will judge you purely on your actions. But this also seems to be because of it's malchiyot zechor and shofar oda musaf. Because of that, that's when God is judging us, and God might judge you by your actions alone without having mercy in the first 3 hours of the day. And that's again the time that the anger of God is around. So now they ask a few questions. Hachi de tzibur nami. Well, then the tzibur shouldn't daven musaf either in the shul. Well, the tzibur and afish zechute. They have a lot more zchuyot together between all the people. They have more merits, so that will protect them. So ihachi dechi de tzafar nami lo. Well, then you shouldn't daven shacharit either if you're an individual in the first 3 hours of the day. Well, because at that hour, there's obviously a tzibur somewhere that's davening, and those merits will stand for you. This is, by the way, where I don't know if it's the source for it, but it definitely connects to this idea that they always say you should daven in bizman shat tzibur mitpalalim. At the time that the community is davening, you should daven also. If you're not going to go to shul, you should daven at the same time that the community is davening. And what they're saying here is if you daven shacharit, because shacharit can only be said in the first 4 hours of the day, and musaf could be said all day. There's not necessarily a likelihood that when you're davening your individual prayer, if someone's saying musaf, one of the community is saying musaf, there's a likelihood that somewhere in the world or somewhere near you, there's a shul davening shacharit. So therefore, you can assume that you're covered by them, and therefore you can daven shacharit, but you can't daven musaf because you can't be sure there's someone else davening musaf at that time. Okay, now they say, wait a minute. But this whole thing contradicts something we saw in Daf Gimel, which is what? Ha'amal shalosh, if you remember, we went through what God does at what hours of the day. And we said then, shalosh rishonot HaKadosh Baruch Hu yoshev osek b'Torah. The first 3 hours, God is learning Torah. The next 3 hours, God judges the people, not the first 3 hours. Here we're talking about judgment being in the first 3 hours. So they say, ipuch, fine, so flip it. The first 3 hours, God is judging. The next 3 hours, God is learning Torah. Or ibait aim, alternatively, you could say lo olam lo table. Don't actually flip it, but Torah dichtiv emet. The Torah is called truth, right? We always say Torat emet, right? So dichtiv emet k'nei v'al timkor, acquire truth and don't sell it. That's the Torah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said lifnei mishurat hadin. So when God is learning Torah, God doesn't do beyond the letter of the law, but God does exactly the letter of the law, and you might not be deserving. But din delokti be'emet, but when it comes to judgment, which isn't necessarily truth always, delokti be'emet doesn't say emet by din. Therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu said lefnim mishurat din. It could be there God will go beyond the letter of the law and be more forgiving. So that's why it could be dafka when God is learning Torah, we should be worried specifically about being judged by absolute truth. Now we have a siman yom me'id taraf be'egal for the next 4 things we're going to do, and with that we're going to finish the daf. 4 statements of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I said we come back to him. He was with the story with the rooster and trying to punish the heretic. And now we're going to start with 2 statements that we actually saw in Daf Gimel. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, my dachtiv asher anochi mitzavcha yom la'asotam, that I commanded you to do today to do. So we're going to focus on the word hayom and la'asotam, today and to do. Hayom la'asotam v'lo machar la'asotam, right? Today to do them and not in the world to come, meaning there are no mitzvot in the world to come. That was we asked, well, why is God giving the Gentiles in the world to come an option to do mitzvot? You can't do mitzvot in the world to come. And hayom la'asotam v'lo hayom litos charan. You're going to do them today, but God is going to save your reward and give you the reward in olam haba. That was the flip of what we were talking about today, where you're going to get, it's the same idea. You're going to get your punishments in this world, and your rewards are going to be saved up for the world to come. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, second statement. Kol mitzvot Yisrael osim ba'olam hazeh, all the mitzvot that we do, Jews do in this world. Ba'odum li'dodotam la'olam haba. They will stand up as testimony in the world to come, as we saw. Shenemar yitnu edehem b'yitzdaku. They will bring their testimonies, and they will be seen as just, as right. Yishma'u v'yomru emet. So how do we explain this? Yitnu edehem b'yitzdaku elu Yisrael. That's the Jews. Yishma'u v'yomru emet. Elu umata olam. Those are the Gentile nations that are going to see that the Jews did their mitzvot, and because of that they got rewarded, and finally they're going to understand and see the truth of God. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, third statement. These yet we haven't seen the third and fourth. Kol mitzvot Yisrael osim ba'olam hazeh, all the mitzvot we do in this world. Ba'ot v'torfot otam lumot olam. This is similar to the previous idea. They're going to smack the Gentiles in the face in the world la'olam haba al pneim. Okay, their torfot, they're hitting the Gentiles in the world to come in their faces, right? Meaning it'll be like a slap in their face to say, look, we did mitzvot and you did not. Shneamar ushmartem vasitem, right? You should observe and do the mitzvot. Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem le'enei ha'amim, because this is your wisdom and your knowledge and wisdom, or however you explain bina, insight in the eyes of the nation. And notice it says neged hamim lo ne'emar. It's not this is your wisdom against the nations when you fight up against them, but ela le'enei hamim, to the eyes of the other nations. Like you show it in their eyes, kind of like slap them in the face, it like hits them in the face. The idea that they see that you did mitzvot, and because of that you're rewarded, and they are not. ואמר רבי יהושע ben Levi, last statement, לא עשו ישראל את העגל, אלא ליתן פתחון פה לבעלי תשובה. They didn't do the egel. No, they didn't do the egel. You might have thought, oh, because they were bad people, they didn't believe in God. No, they did the egel only because God wanted them to worship the golden calf so that he can make a spectacle of this for the future, to teach the people, and we're going to see this in a minute, that they can repent, that the door is always open to repentance. And that's why God did this seemingly early on, to teach people this lesson. Okay, and we're going to see two examples of this. One is Cheder Ekel, and one is going to be David with Bathsheba. So now we're going to see Shneamar. How do we know this? Because it said in Sefer Dvarim, when it describes the Jews at the time of Har Sinai in chapter 5, like who would make it that you were like that, that you would fear me like this forever. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Lo David ra'oi lo Thomas said David wasn't ra'oi it wasn't worthy of doing the act that he did with Bathsheba. But lo Yisrael ru'im lo Thomas said, and neither of them really should have done what they did. Okay, it wasn't on their own that they did it. Lo David ra'oi lo Thomas said Dechtiv libi chalal b'kirbi. Now, the way they understand this pasuk in Tehillim, libi chalal b'kirbi, they're first of all putting it in the words of David, because David, they attribute Tehillim to David. Libi chalal b'kirbi means my heart, my evil inclination was a hole in my heart, meaning it wasn't there. I didn't have an evil inclination anymore for this. V'lo Yisrael ru'yin lo tomaseh dechtiv miyitem v'yalav avam zeh liyirah oti kol yamin. Right? They were at this perfect state of belief in God. So what happened? And we're going to just continue a little bit into tomorrow's daf. Elalama asu, why did they do it? Lomar lecha, shim chata yachid, omrim lo, kalech etzel yachid. In individual sins, we say, go look at David. He sinned, but he repented. And if the community does sins, omrim lo, kalech etzel tzibor. They say, go look at the tzibor and look at Cheder Egel. They repented and they were forgiven. Okay, and it's to teach you the value of repentance. Okay, so we end with this concept of how important repentance is. And Agdei Kach, that they're claiming that David and Cheder Egel happened really as an idea of God making this happen to teach a lesson for the future. With that, we finish today's daf. We'll do a quick review. Let's do an overview where we talked about this concept of Yisurin Shel Ahava and God punishing the Jewish people bit by bit in order to allow us to get our real reward in the world to come, as opposed to God's treatment of the Gentiles. Again, this idea about the differences between the Jews and the Gentiles. We talked about this idea about the Gentiles, right, on the one hand, are deserving of destruction, but if they do have good actions, good deeds, that can prevent them from getting destroyed. We had this story with the heretic, and again, it connected with that same idea of the Yisurin Shel Ahava. We talked about the tzaddik getting punished with the rasha, which tzaddikim exactly that happens to. And then we had the whole long thing about the anger of God and how Bilam knew exactly when this moment was. That every day God gets angry, but doesn't release his anger on, right? Doesn't kind of protects us from that, like in the Bilam story where God didn't, since Bilam knew exactly that moment, and he could have really succeeded in cursing us, God prevented that from happening. And from there, we got to these statements of, when that anger is, what time does it come out? Sometime in the morning hours. We had some things having to do with that. And, leading into don't have a musaf b'yichidut in the morning hours, because that's when God's, kind of anger is out, and the truth of God and the deen, and, it could be like the strict letter of the law. And we ended with these 4 statements of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a good and a safe day. And we'll see you, by the way, at the Siyum tonight. Looking forward to seeing you there.